have a panel with us today I'm very excited about, and we have Assemblyman Howard Watts, that is the chair of the Natural Resource Committee in the Nevada Legislature. We have Nevada Division of Water Resources State Engineer Adam Sullivan, and we have Central Nevada Regional Water Authority Executive Director Jeff Fontaine. So basically with this panel, we're going to give each panel member, like we did with the vet panel, they'll have 10 to 15 minutes to discuss what's going on, things they'd like to discuss with this crowd, and then we will go into a Q&A session. We're going to move on to our state engineer, Adam Sullivan.
So Division of Water Resources for the state is, as most of you know, but since Howard started off talking about the Colorado River, I wanted to mention that we have authority over regulation of all sources of water except for the Colorado River. Which is, I agree with what Assemblyman Watts was saying, that the Colorado River from a statewide perspective is an important resource. It's something that it's really its own animal, and I'm glad that we, as a small state agency, that we just have the authority over the rest of the state. This is, again, echoing what Assemblyman Watts said about this storm series that we're going through. It's really taking the heat off, and it's a nice time to be talking about water. I was just checking the data, and we're up around 200% for precipitation statewide for this time of year, and for the snow water equivalent at the mountain gauges, we're roughly at about the median for the annual peak already. So there's still a long way to go, and for the season, and of course we saw what happened last year with a really dry spring, but it bodes well for this season, for the near term. Recharging the reservoirs and a nice pulse aquifer recharge, and it's all good news. But really, when we're thinking about water issues, and again, following up nicely on Assemblyman Watts, the bigger problems that we're looking at are really long-term issues, and primarily not having enough water, actual water, to meet all the commitments. And it's very localized. In some areas on paper look a lot worse, and the issues are a lot less urgent. Well, I'll talk about this more as we go through. So that's one topic I want to cover, and then the second is I just want to bring up a couple of things that are important, I think, specifically for this audience about water rights for stock, and some of the things from my perspective that I would like to take this opportunity to convey. So again, let's talk a little bit about the issue of having where appropriations exceed the actual water supply or the perennial yield. There's a lot of different reasons for how we got to this point. It's accumulation of generations of decisions. Again, it really depends on where you are, what the severity of the issue is, and how you should approach it, and what the best way to resolve it might be. There's not really any simple path forward. It relies on a lot of good data, a lot of participation with the community that's affected, and a common understanding of what the options are and what the benefits of different actions might be. It's something, the way I look at it is it's really a long-term dilemma to manage. It's not something that will be easily resolved, and we really need to proceed cautiously as a state that's supportive to the water users and the resource. Really, from Division of Water Resources perspective, what we're trying to accomplish is, within the constraints of the law, how can we limit water to the actual water availability, while protecting senior rights and also facilitating beneficial use of water where it is available and where it's necessary, to how can we reduce those commitments in a way that's least harmful to the community that's affected. Again, there's no easy fix. In my experience of being on the job here, I've just seen a lot of willingness in different communities to be open about what the risks are, what different solutions might be, and in some ways, another point to make here is that we're ahead of the game in comparison to some of the other Western states, and the severity of what we're seeing still has a lot of there's a lot of opportunity for resilience and good long-term resource management. So I feel good about that for Nevada in the long term. The water law is really great in Nevada for just appropriating water and keeping track of who has water rights, and the transfer of water rights among willing sellers. That's its real strength. Water law doesn't have a lot of it's not really good for managing shortages. It's really tough, and it's just there isn't a lot of certainty. So going into the legislative session, there aren't water policy bills that Division of Water Resources is bringing forward, but we are certainly a participant in all the discussions that we're going to be hearing. And I do believe that some well thought out clarifications to water law will be helpful. So then I want to talk a little bit more specifically about stock water. When I first started working here, with what I learned, what I was trained, is that stock water is one of the most complex areas of water law, and contentious and confusing. And it takes up a lot of time on our part for such a small amount of water. It's still very important, but it really does represent a tiny fraction of the water that we use statewide. A lot of Western states don't even require a water right for stock wells. It's treated a little bit more like a domestic well. It's just a subsistence use, and it's not enough water to even be treated like major water users. So that's kind of intriguing. That would be, I can see some advantages to that. Obviously, it's a lot less paperwork. It would be a lot easier for stock water users. But at the same time, recognizing stock water use with a water right is important for protecting those sources of water, and for documenting that even though it's a small amount of water, it's really important. So even though it's a small amount of water, we treat it we view it just like any other water right, as a protectable interest and important to the users. So a couple things I just wanted to convey. If you're a water rights holder and you haven't checked very recently, check the status of your water right. And if you've changed ownership, if you've conveyed it, even among family members, update that ownership, file a report of conveyance with our office. It ends up being really protective for you, and so any correspondence from this office will go to the right person, and if there's any issues, that you'll be aware of it. Secondly, if you hold vested right or claims of vested right, there's a deadline of December 31st, 2026. Well, let me back up a little bit. There's a deadline, December 31st, 2026, of anyone who has a claim, a vested right, needs to file it with this office. So if you have any questions about that, please call the office. If you have a water source that you rely upon that has been in continual use since before water law was established over 100 years ago, then you need to file a claim of that vested right. If you have information that shows chain of title on a vested right or a claim of right that's already on file with us, you can file that information, or copies of that information. We'll add it to that file. And the importance of that kind of goes along with the reason for setting that deadline in statute is really to document that history with the state and also have a good understanding of what the water commitments are. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is that there's a provision in law for an emergency stock water well. And this comes up every time we're in a drought period. And it's a good provision. It's kind of an emergency use. If we're in a drought and you need to have an emergency well, we could issue an appropriation for that. But the important thing to know is that after a certain amount of time, you need to get a permanent water right to keep that well unplugged. So if that is something that you find yourself needing, please call our office and make sure you know what you're getting into, because we've had some problems where we issued those emergency stock water rights, and then there hasn't been an ability to keep that water right in good standing, and people had to plug those wells. And that's all I've got. I'll hopefully save some time for questions.